Our next speaker is Jeffrey Starr, the Chief Operating Officer of Neoprime Solutions. He's also a visiting professor at the University of Maryland. Dr. Starr clawed his way all the way to the top of the federal bureaucracy and becoming an SES, including at the Department of Defense, where he did some interesting work on the financial network of terrorists. He's got his degrees from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and the University of Illinois. Welcome. Great to see you.
I'm sure almost all of you know more about smart grids than I do, but I know a thing or two about cyber challenges to the utility sector, and it's about that which I'd like to speak. Of course, for me, smart grids are distinguished by the fact that there's a two-way digital communication between consumer and supplier, which doesn't really change the fundamentals of the energy supply business in my mind. It does create additional attack surface from a cybersecurity perspective, but it doesn't really change the basic threat and challenge that we face in securing our utilities and electrical systems from cyber attack. And that's my basic thesis. The corollary of that is, in order to achieve cybersecurity, or in order to achieve risk management of cyber threats, we need to change the way we do modeling. And as I should announce that as a founder of a company called Neoprime Solutions, we focus in the area of cyber risk management and modeling of cyber risk from a catastrophic modeling perspective. And we bring a different view of risk to the equation, which I'd like to introduce to you now as a element of how to think about risk in the utility space. So the cybersecurity challenges we'll be facing tomorrow after we achieve smart grid status at some point in the future as we're moving in that direction are fundamentally the same as what we have today. So the basic truth will remain in that case that in the future, as now, our utility space is under assault. It's under international and domestic cybersecurity assault from nation states, from organized crime groups, from hacktivists, probably in that order of priority, and from nation states outsourcing to organized crime groups. So it begs the question, and of course we have plenty of examples of that. Previous speakers have spoken about the event in Ukraine in 2015, blackout. The Lansing ransomware event also is indicative of a growing threat, as probably most people in the room are generally aware of the growing threat of ransomware in the cyberspace. So the fact that the nature of the threat may not change that much even as we move towards a smart grid environment begs the question of why we would plan for more of the same kind of paradigm, the same kind of approach for addressing cybersecurity challenges. A brand new executive order was signed yesterday, or this morning, I think yesterday, which is a good move. It brings to fruition a document in this administration which will address cybersecurity. And it will be the administration's document, focal point for driving cybersecurity protection of the electrical sector, among other sectors, but critical infrastructure in general. But it's really, I'd say, a plan for a plan. It requires departments and agencies to investigate authorities and responsibilities, to investigate authorities and capabilities that exist. But it does introduce the concept of risk management practices. It's not new in cybersecurity, of course, but it's useful for this federal document, for the executive order, to talk about movement towards a risk management framework. It doesn't accomplish anything in and of itself. It doesn't define what risk management entails. And then it kind of moves on to hold agency departments and heads, departments and heads of agencies, heads of departments and agencies responsible for security lapses in their own organization. So there's a little bit of an enforcement element to this too. But it really amounts to a plan for a plan. When we look across the domain of activities underway in cybersecurity for the utility space, there's a lot of focus, and in the literature that attended this conference, a lot of focus on data sharing. Data sharing is great. A lot of big companies are involved in a lot of data sharing. Very little of that data sharing reaches the intended audience in a way that can be actionable and that is useful from the perspective of the utility recipient in defending its grid, in defending its facilities. partly because of the anonymization of the character of the data. It's not detailed enough. And partly it's a lot of the utilities don't have the capability to mount much of a defense of their own facilities in any case. So while data sharing is important, I'd say necessary, it's far from sufficient. One of the factors which will continue in our struggle, the offense-defense relationship here, is the struggle between compliance and what NIST is now calling situational awareness, and kind of a brand new development. And the person from NIST, the previous speaker, had worked at NIST. But of course, compliance in the utility space is a important, I'm not denigrating it, but it is a box-checking exercise. If you're not compliant, then you win liabilities that you want to avoid. You might even be subject to penalties and sanctions. On the other hand, if you are compliant, that doesn't mean you're secure. Everyone knows that Target would have passed a compliance review prior to the third-party vendor vector POS attack on it a few years ago. But NIST has begun to search for alternatives to a pure compliance approach, and I think this is critical if you think about risk management. And they're asking the community now to think through what would be the requirements of situational awareness. And I think that, and how would you track operational technology risks, cyber risks to operational technology, to OT in real time? That will be the key to creating the basis for a risk management approach. And of course, my view is we need a new modeling approach to this. Because the principal threats to utilities are vectors. We can talk about malware, we can talk about endpoint solutions. Lots of companies do lots of really cool things to defend pieces of equipment and parts of the network. But if your network isn't segmented, and if you haven't protected yourself from various vectors of attacks, you're still vulnerable. Phishing, probably the most important source of attack against utilities, and broader than utilities. Insider threat, third-party vendors. These are all vectors which need to be dealt with and which aren't generally dealt with adequately, certainly in a compliance kind of environment. So I propose that we think about new enterprise modeling for the entire utility space. And there's a parallel here. GAO developed in its critique of the Federal Aviation Administration a couple of years ago, pointed out that the FAA had done great work in cyber protection of air traffic control systems, of discrete air traffic control systems. It's a little bit like protecting smart meters, a little bit like protecting all the endpoints within a network of a utility, or the new technologies that might be attendant to a smart grid. What the GAO said was the FAA remained deeply vulnerable to attack. The aviation ecology remained deeply vulnerable to attack because there was no systematic enterprise-level risk management-focused modeling of the threat. And so we have to think in terms of dynamic threat and the game that occurs between the threat and defense. Offense, defense, it's a two-player or sometimes multiplayer game, and that means we have to model it in a different way in order to achieve not protection as our primary variable that we're going after, which is our current mindset, build the moat around the network, but risk of loss. If you're a financial advisor, you know you're going to lose money. If you're United Airlines, you know that the price of jet fuel is going to go up in 5 years, so you create a futures market to buy jet fuel on the spot market today to balance, to dampen the capital volatility of jet fuel in the future. That is, you create you reduce capital volatility surrounding your most important business operations and assets. We need to think about cybersecurity in exactly the same way. There is no defense that is assured from a cybersecurity perspective. With every advance in defenses, there will be advances in offense. And so it is an offense-defense game against which we cannot now assume we will be successful. So I propose then that we think through a different pathway, a different approach to thinking about risk management, and that means dynamic offense-defense gaming in order to create an updated, constantly innovative picture of what the threat is and model attack pathways into a target utility, into a target network in order to achieve objectives in order to compromise business assets located on a network, and therefore, if you can model those attack pathways, you can find attack pathways that even penetration tests cannot find today, because a pen test is only good for today. And it's good tomorrow at 99%. 6 months from now, today's pen test ceases to be of much value, depending on how much the threat has evolved in that period of time. So we need to create a modeling approach that looks at a dynamic threat, models attack pathways against a target network, creates a forecast of expected damages over time, just like a financial advisor would use those same capabilities to model a financial portfolio in a similar parallel sort of fashion, so that in a cybersecurity world, a company can then calculate what its expected financial loss is going to be over time and create a hedge strategy. A hedge strategy that will allow it to identify what the greatest sources of loss within its network are and how to dampen those losses over time on an expected basis so they can dampen its own capital volatility over time. Again, it's not just the defense of the network, it's prevention of the loss, financial loss related to cyber damages. Take a risk of loss view.